We are the campaign to make polluters pay. We are here today to start our fight to make the biggest oil and gas companies pay billions over the next 25 years to keep us safe from the coming impacts of climate change. I'm Dan, the legislative manager with 350 Mass, and co-lead of this campaign with my colleague Rachel from CREW, Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, who has done a huge amount of organizing to get us here today. Let's hear it for Rachel. Before we start, I want to note that it is a dangerous time to be an activist. A week and a day ago, Mahmoud Khalil was abducted from his New York apartment and disappeared for days before public outcry and a judge's order made the administration produce him. The arresting agents never identified themselves or charged him with a crime. To be an activist in our country is to take on approaching danger, from ICE and other white supremacists to fires and floods. While some of us may be protected longer than others because of our class or race or issue that we focus on, or the sheer incompetence, let's be honest, of our opponents, in the eyes of the administration, we are all dissidents. Our solution is standing together in the face of wannabe kings and corporate power alike. And this campaign directly takes on the oligarchs that are burning our future for a quick buck. Just down the road in Copley, activists are rallying right now for Mahmoud Khalil's release. To them and to Mahmoud, solidarity forever. Their fight and ours are connected. Today, you'll hear from advocates and legislators about why we must make polluters pay. We are going to pass a bill right here in Massachusetts to establish the Climate Superfund and make the biggest oil and gas companies pay billions of dollars over the next 2.5 decades. They lied for years, blocked solutions, and in the last year alone, just 36 of them were responsible for half of our global fossil fuel emissions. Shame, right? The money that they pay into the Climate Superfund will help our communities thrive in the face of the now inevitable impacts of climate change. We can't stop our fight to reduce emissions, but we have to prepare for rising seas and extreme heat, fires and floods, increased disease, and worsened air quality. This is the world that the fossil fuel companies have built for us. But it's not too late to fight them. C-suites across Exxon, Shell, and Citgo are likely popping champagne right now. They think they've won. They may start to realize that they've gotten more than what they wanted with the drill baby drill administration. But either way, our campaign will show them how wrong they are. And it's not just our campaign. There is a federal campaign. There are the victorious campaigns defending the bills that passed in Vermont and New York. Let's hear it for Vermont and New York. And we'll hear from one of those New York organizers shortly. But right now, we're going to bring together our many, many, many Massachusetts climate organizations. We've already won the support of Mass Power Forward and the rising youth energy of the Mass Youth Climate Coalition, and the 20 endorsing organizations, many of whom are here today, of our Make Polluters Pay coalition. Thank you so much to our endorsing organizations. That includes faith leaders like UMass Action, labor like SEIU 509. Thank you for being our first labor endorsement. Public health advocates like Greater Boston Physicians for Social Responsibility. Right there in the corner. Thank you, Susan. And our environmental justice allies. And you'll hear more about that from Tristan. Thank you so much for being here. And we represent the massive majority of us who are done with business as usual. We need you. We need your neighbor, and we need your whole community. Thank you so much for joining us today. Join us in the fights to come. Thank you. So we have a bit of schmoozing time today. We have a great speaker lineup for you. We have Isel from the Mass Youth Climate Coalition, Rep. Owens of Watertown, Rep. Lewis of Framingham, and Tristan from ACE. Thank you so much to Rep. Owens and Rep. Lewis for being here, our legislative champions in our deeply, deeply defunct state house. They are a ray of light, they're a ray of sunshine. And we have some great activities for you afterwards. So it's an honor to start us off to introduce Isel Barrios, an organizer with Our Climate and a key youth ally of this movement. Give it up for Isel.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Isel, and I'm a 22-year-old college student from Tucson, Arizona. I'm here representing the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition, a coalition of over 24 organizations and hundreds of youth activists across the state. Like many people my age, I have grown up watching climate change happen. Growing up in Arizona, the looming specter of a hotter and drier future in a place where heat and drought are already dangers was terrifying, especially since impacts of these changes are not felt equally. Those who are already vulnerable, like the elderly and those without access to air conditioning, are the hardest hit when climate disaster strikes. Living in Massachusetts has shown me a whole new set of climate risks. Like Arizona, Massachusetts faces rising temperatures. It's also at risk from rising seas and flooding, which threaten our communities. And just like in Arizona, it is those who are the most vulnerable who will be hit the hardest. It is abundantly clear that we are not ready for climate change. We are not ready for the higher seas, for the hotter days, for the fires and floods and stronger storms and hurricanes. And it is abundantly clear that the people who will be the most impacted by this are those who are the most vulnerable. But before I get to what we should do about that, I want to talk about another thing that a lot of people my age have grown up with, and that is the idea that climate change is our fault. Like many people my age, I grew up with the idea of the carbon footprint, or the emissions that my individual actions were responsible for. The overwhelming message I received was that I was causing climate change with the things that I did. Here's the funny thing about that narrative, though. The idea of the carbon footprint was created by big oil companies, meant to make us think that climate change was our fault and not theirs. That climate change was happening because of things we did and not because huge corporations produced fossil fuels for decades and decades, knowing full well they were sacrificing my future and the future of every young person on this planet to make a profit. And that brings me back to what we should do about the climate impacts that are now barreling toward us. We must make polluters pay. Big emitters bear so much of the responsibility for this problem, but so far, they haven't had to pay their fair share. The Climate Superfund bill will force them to pay to clean up the mess they've made, giving our communities the funding that we so desperately need to prepare for climate change and holding them accountable for their actions. There's one more thing about this narrative, that climate change is caused by our individual actions. Because what that does is frame the solution as individual action. But we know that is not how change happens. Change happens when people from all backgrounds and organizations come together to build and leverage our collective power. Making polluters pay is not going to be easy, but this kind of a campaign with so many of us involved is the only way to hold them accountable for the damage that they've done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isel. First-time public speaker, not that you'll believe that. The first time did a fantastic job. Thank you so much. Another round for Hazel. Next up, we have two-time Make Polluters Pay champion, the representative from Watertown himself, Representative Steve Owens. Thank you so much for being with us today.
So not only do I have to follow Hazel, which, wow, but now the two-time champion makes it sound like we were successful last session, and I don't want everybody to think that the work is over, because we did it. So thank you all for coming out here. Thank you to the Make Polluters Pay Coalition, 350 Mass, and all the coalition partners. Thanks for coming out here for the launch of the Climate Change Superfund, the Polluters Pay Act. The principle of Polluters Pay is very simple, right? Those who make the mess should clean it up. Now, those of you with kids or roommates might know that in practice, sometimes that doesn't always work, but it's a pretty simple proposition. And the bill that we've proposed is simple too, right? It would impose a fee on the largest emitters of greenhouse gases in Massachusetts that would go into a climate resiliency superfund. These would be polluters like Shell Oil, whose profits doubled in 2022 to $42 billion, which is just shy of the amount of money it takes to run Massachusetts, the state, right? So that's the scale of their profits. ExxonMobil, $56 billion. And ExxonMobil, by the way, they forecasted how climate change would cause global temperatures to rise as long ago as the 70s. They knew what they were doing. They knew the impact of all the fossil fuels that they were pulling out of the ground and burning. They knew what that was going to do to global temperatures. Their private research, it predicted it. It predicted that it would warm the planet, even though as the company publicly denied the link. So they were lying to us. They've gotten away with polluting our air with greenhouse gases, and they knew the consequences, and this bill requires big polluters to pay that fee based on their share of historic emissions that would go to a climate change adaptation superfund. And the superfund model for dealing with pollution works, right? I represent Watertown. I see some of my Watertown people here. Raise your hand, clap. Yeah, a couple of you. Yeah, there you go. And that's a Superfund success story. The Watertown Arsenal was designated as a Superfund site in 1994, and cleanup activities removed contamination and demolished the nuclear reactor. They were, back in the 50s and 60s, you had nuclear waste, you just took it out back and burnt it in a pit. So that was cleaned up because of the EPA's Superfund money. And now the former Arsenal is once again an engine of growth in the Watertown. Arsenal Yards development, if you've not been to the Arsenal in Watertown now, come on over. We've got, there's a lot going on over there. You watch a movie, get dinner. And a climate resiliency superfund can do the same for those areas most impacted by the devastating effects of climate change. We know now that storms are going to be more serious as sea level rise, shoreline erosion, storm surges, they're going to impact our coast. Rising temperatures, shifting rainfall patterns are likely to increase the intensity of the floods and droughts. And we estimate that Polluters Pay is going to raise billions over 25 years that would all go to those climate adaptation projects. And that includes infrastructure projects like seawalls and stormwater improvements and making defensive upgrades to roads, bridges, subways, transit, improving the grid infrastructure so it can handle our transition to electrification. Environmental projects like wetlands, forest restoration, invasive species management, but also cleanup projects after storms. The estimates show that a Category 4 hurricane in Massachusetts could deal up to $76 billion in damages. And by the way, oil and gas companies spent more than $500 billion on identifying, extracting, and producing new oil and gas supplies last year. They delivered $230 billion in shareholder dividends and spent $130 billion on stock buybacks. So I think what we're asking for is appropriate given what they've already given themselves. The amount we are asking them to contribute, it's a pittance compared to those numbers. And on top of that, we've lost any federal partner in dealing with climate change. And in fact, they're deleting any reference to it from their websites and documents again. Shame is right. They have no interest in reducing greenhouse gases. They want to increase the use of fossil fuels, and they've shown a willingness to hold recovery efforts hostage for political purposes. So the cavalry is not coming. We need to do this ourselves. And we are buoyed by the success in New York and Vermont and the national campaign in other states like Maryland and California. This is our chance to prepare the Commonwealth for the inevitable. This bill is designed to hold those responsible for extreme weather events and further allowing cities and towns to prepare and, most importantly, protect their residents. So thank you all for coming out. We have a lot of work to do before it. I know you're probably going to announce it, but I just want to thank my partner, Representative Lewis from Framingham, for joining the fight this session. Senator. When you're in the legislature, you get to pick who you work with, and I really am very excited to work with Rep. Lewis going forward on this. Senator Eldridge sends his regrets. He wishes he could be here as well, and sends you well wishes. So thank you all for coming here, and let's get to work.
Thank you so much, Rep. Owens. Thank you for sticking with this fight. When you ask anyone about climate in the State House, they'll point you towards his door. He is our biggest climate champion out there. And he is chair of the Clean Energy Caucus, which we are hoping will really rally behind this bill this time around. And speaking of caucuses, we have a treat. Rep. Jack Lewis, the chair of the Progressive Caucus, has decided to sponsor the bill and join Rep. Owens in leading the fight in the House to get this thing passed this year or next year. In this session, we're going to pass this bill. So, Rep. Lewis, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
First, I want to thank you, Steve, for inviting me to join you on this bill along with Senator Jamie Eldridge, and to you and your friends for stopping by my office a couple months ago, like multiple times a week, answering every question I could think of, and just really honored to be a part of this team with all of you. I represent Framingham and Ashland in the House. I know we have one Framingham person here. Any other Framingham, Ashland? Okay, one superstar. But thank you for being here. I know you all had a choice of green things to do today, and I am grateful you chose this one over the alternative. For those who did both, I'm jealous to be young again and to be able to manage a morning activity, the parade, and to be here to change the world. Again, time goes by too fast for people like Steve and me. When I was brought into this bill, I was just chatting with Steve about, how have you been talking about this in the community? How did this event go 2 years ago? And he shared the story of, he and I both have kids. He's like, Jack, it's like your kids. They get to do what they want. They get to play in their rooms or in the yard. They take their toys out. But you have an expectation that if they make a mess, they're going to clean it up. And I love it. It sounds so good. I've met your kids. I live with my kids. That is not the case in my house. But then it started me thinking of growing up, I was that kid who was always fearful that if I didn't clean up my mess, something bad was going to happen. And it was chatting with my mother recently where she reminded me of something that I actually didn't need to be reminded about. Almost 40 years ago now, I refused to put away my linking logs. Who remembers linking logs? Okay. So there's a age differentiation in the room. But they're these little logs that you'd build log cabins with. And I apparently at 3 said no, I wouldn't clean them up. And my mom, without missing a beat, walked over, picked up the smallest of linking logs and threw it into the fireplace. Apparently, for days, I was what's the word I'm looking for? No, insoluble, yes. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe the climate companies aren't like Steve's kids, or like I want my kids to be. They're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. Maybe there is a way forward for us to make sure that if you're going to continue to do what you know is hurting our community, hastening climate change, you're going to have to give back to communities and to our Commonwealth for that reason. And as we all know, not just on the environmental front, but we have no idea what tomorrow is going to look like on the economic level, foreign policy. We could go down a list of reasons that I don't want to get out of bed in the morning, other than knowing that I have so much work to do. But when it comes to the economy, we don't know what we're going to get as a state. Something like 25% of our state budget comes directly from the feds. We could do similar math about at the municipal level. I can promise you, federal funding to fight climate change is not going to be coming. We can hope that some education funding comes, but I can't imagine a world over the next 3.5 years where that funding is going to come. And as a Commonwealth and as municipalities, we can't print money. We have to have a balanced budget. And I think as we talk about making polluters pay, it's also vital that we think about what this will mean for the Commonwealth and for our communities, because making polluters pay sounds good, but pay who for what, I think, is the piece that's equally important. And so I am so excited to be joining you and joining this larger coalition, working with all of you that live in Massachusetts. You have a state rep, you have a state senator. We are elected by our bosses, you, our voters. And so take that opportunity, if you don't know your state rep or state senator, to introduce yourself, shoot them an email, inviting them to learn more about this legislation. We already have, I want to say, dozens of co-sponsors. It's a larger number than we had 2 weeks ago. I should have checked it before I came today. But tangible asks of our colleagues, of ways to show support, but at the very least, take that time to make sure our colleagues know that this has passed in New York and in Vermont. While I'd love Massachusetts to always be on the forefront, and I would have loved to say we were the first, the fact that neighboring states have already done this means that the path forward is clearer than it would have been. And so we're not going to be able to do this alone. Steve and I and Senator Eldridge certainly aren't going to be able to do it without all of you. But again, I am so grateful to be a part of this coalition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rep. Lewis. Thank you for being here, and thank you for joining our fight. And thank you as well to Senator Eldridge, who unfortunately had a conflict today, but has been a stalwart champion for this bill from the start. And we know we'll have him at some future Make Polluters Pay events. Before we go to our finale, Tristan from Alternatives for Community and the Environment, we're going to hear a brief video from an organizer in New York who won their bill there and has some lessons to share with us. So I'm going to give my colleague Evan a moment to get that rolling. I'm going to take this banner off.
Hello, I'm Michael Richardson. I'm the co-facilitator for Third Act in upstate New York. And I'm here today to talk to you about our experience with our Climate Change Superfund Act, which many of you know was the second in the nation. It was passed last December. And the lessons that we learned, the best practices that were employed. And number one about that was that we were struggling with getting in a broad coalition. We had reached out to faith-based groups or youth groups, but we were missing that coalition that was made up of organizations and institutions that weren't part of the climate movement, that had another more compelling story. And what we realized that was our municipalities, our towns, our villages, and our counties. In essence, the taxpayers. Because every time there was a storm, who ends up paying for it? It is the local taxpayer who's putting the money into their Department of Public Works, or DPW. So at that point, it was like a eureka moment for us, that we realized that maybe this shouldn't be sold as a climate bill, but how about like a municipal taxpayer relief act? And with that, we went to the Association of Counties and our Conference of Mayors, and we talked to them about the situation where every time that there is a storm, they have to pay for it out of what they call their rainy day fund. And we recognize that the rainy days now happen more than once or twice a year. In fact, they're not even rainy days anymore, they're deluges. And they're causing severe damages that are depleting their budgets down to bare bones, putting them in literally fiscal stress. So with that, we petitioned to them to get involved with writing to their legislators and to the governor. We actually had a petition, a signed letter, with over 700 local elected officials that signed it. And we had an amazing response from that. In fact, I would say that out of all the things that we did that made a difference, that this one thing, this one eureka moment that we had, probably made more difference than any other one thing. So I would encourage you to make contact with your associations there, sit down and have this discussion with them. And again, it doesn't have to be about climate, it's about the taxpayer. And I think that you might find that you're going to get a good, strong advocate and ally. So thank you for allowing me to share this moment with you, and all the best. All the best. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And if our folks can help get some of those lights back on, that'd be lovely. Awesome. And a fun fact about Massachusetts: who knows how much money our cities and towns on average have on hand to deal with the costs of climate change? Around $5,000. That's exactly correct. On average, cities and towns have $5,000 to deal with disaster relief. There might be more if the governor unlocks some funding. There might be more if FEMA is functional and unlocks funding. But $5,000 is not enough to deal with what we know is coming. And I don't want to pay for it. Demi, do you want to pay for it? I don't think you want to pay for it. We need to make sure that the polluters pay for it. And I'm going to pass it off to our final speaker. Tristan is the new policy director, is that right, with ACE? Congratulations on the new job, and welcome to the coalition. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Tristan Thomas, and I'm proud to serve as Director of Policy for Alternatives for Community and Environment, or ACE. ACE is a neighborhood-based environmental justice organization with our headquarters in Nubian Square. In our neighborhood in Nubian Square, life expectancy drops as low as 68 years, a whole 23 years less than parts of Back Bay. A couple stops on the orange line is the difference of decades of life, a whole generation, a whole childhood, a whole career, a lifetime of memories that residents of Roxbury are robbed. We know what is doing the robbing. We know what is affecting our communities. It is the negative environmental health impacts that the polluters have forced upon us. Bad air quality and asthma are rampant in Roxbury. Our young people visit emergency rooms instead of school. Our elders become prisoners in their own homes when there's a heat wave. Our parks are concrete and our air is heavy with injustice. And that is why ACE is in this fight. We are done letting polluters poison and profit from us. It's time for us to force them to pay the price. We are done asking nicely for scraps. Roxbury and Massachusetts will make polluters pay. The Climate Superfund will provide the resources that our communities need to survive and to thrive. The billions in dollars will go to healthcare programs and medical care to address the health impacts from climate change, air quality monitoring and mitigation, decarbonizing our buildings, schools, and public housing, addressing urban heat effects and through our green space, and so much more. Imagine schools where kids can learn without having worried to gasp for air, where our elders can live long, healthy, dignified lives, where our streets are shaded by trees and not choked by exhaust. This is the future we are fighting for, but none of it happens if polluters do not pay. So I need you all to join us in this fight and to enlist your neighbors, your community members, your friends, your loved ones, because folks in my community are suffering and we are dying. This is for Roxbury and for every community that has been told to wait our turn. Our turn is now. Our lives are worth more than their profits. So now let's get to work, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Tristan. Powerfully said, and we are honored to have you in this fight. Thank you so much. We are going to transition now from our speaking portion of the event to the doing portion of the event. We have a petition for you. We're going to have 3 stations set up, a policy corner, a envisioning corner to talk about what this will mean for your community to have billions of dollars flowing into Massachusetts, and a video corner to share why you're in this fight and why this bill matters to you. Before we get into that, I would love for folks to stand up if you're able and join us on stage. And we're going to take a group picture to show what we're starting with. And then we can move on at the end of the session to what we're ending with. So folks are able to join in front of the stage, around. We'll get some of this stuff out of here. And thank you so much.